When I saw my godson holding that tool in his hand and calling me, I couldn't resist. I went straight over. Good afternoon to everyone here on the Infidelity Stories channel. Today, I want to share with you what my godson used to do with me. I was left speechless and let him do whatever he wanted. Everything his father couldn't do, he did. My name is Susan. I'm 40 years old, 5'7", and I weigh 70 kilos, about 154 pounds. My skin is pale as snow. I come from a German family, the third generation to be exact. I married young, at 25, to Cornelius, who is of Dutch descent. At the time, he was 37. We lived in Curitiba, Brazil. He couldn't have children, as he discovered he was infertile, but no one else knew this except for me. Cornelius was the chief engineer at a Dutch factory that made pie-making machines. He made me a proposal shortly after we got married. He suggested that I become pregnant by one of his friends, and in return, he would pay me support for 18 years, and I would never tell anyone about it. When our child grew up, we would divorce, and the only other condition was that his friend, who was willing to help us, would agree if I fulfilled one of his fantasies. I accepted this offer easily. I let Cornelius know when I was ready, and he brought a friend from Holland who didn't speak Portuguese. We spent a week together, engaging in intimate relations in my home. He wasn't particularly well endowed, but he was kind and did something I loved. It wasn't difficult to fulfill my husband's desire to be a father, and honestly, I enjoyed it. Cornelius was infertile but certainly not weak, so I spent that entire week with both of them. Cornelius was thrilled. His Dutch friend was even happier. After a week, the friend left, but unfortunately, I didn't get pregnant. That's when Cornelius decided we should adopt. We chose the most beautiful child, even though the pregnancy hadn't worked out. Cornelius promised to keep paying me support for 18 years, but after 7 months, he decided to separate. At the time, I wasn't too upset about the divorce, but as the years went by, I began to miss our son. A year, and during those visits, we would rekindle our old relationship briefly, and I'd see my son for a few days before he disappeared again. Many years passed. I was 50 by then, still attractive enough to turn heads when I walked by. John was now 25, and Cornelius was 62. One day, after not seeing John for a long time, Cornelius asked me to take care of him for a year while he worked in Africa. He explained that it would be hard for John to finish his studies over there. I wasn't receiving support from Cornelius anymore, but he promised to pay me during that time. He also warned me that if John and I had any disagreements, he'd take him away from me. I was so thrilled that I didn't even want to charge him, but he insisted, and I agreed. Cornelius explained that John's classes wouldn't start until February. John was incredibly handsome, with blue eyes he inherited from me. He was polite, calm, and well-spoken. I'm calm by nature too, but I admit I spoiled him a bit. Now that I was receiving good money to care for him, I decided to quit my job until and December and January were extremely hot. I always dressed comfortably at home, in shorts and mini-skirts, and I didn't change my habits when John arrived. Our house had only one bedroom, or he could sleep in the living room, but John chose to sleep in the bedroom with me. I'm not much of a drinker, but since I wasn't working, I occasionally had some drinks in the afternoons to relax. The first 2 nights went smoothly. We talked a lot, watched movies, played video games, and ate junk food until we fell asleep. On the 3rd night, I woke up and felt something wet behind me. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought John had spilled ice cream or soda in bed. I got up, took a shower, and changed my clothes. But 2 days later, I woke up in the same situation. This time, the substance was on my underwear. I wanted to figure out if it was food so I could tell John not to eat or drink in bed. When I touched it and smelled it, I was shocked. I knew immediately what it was. I couldn't believe my son had relieved him down and asked what had happened to leave the bed in such a state. He shamelessly admitted that he had relieved himself. I calmly told him he couldn't do that to me and should go to the bathroom instead. He looked me in the eyes and said he couldn't do it in the bathroom. I repeated that he couldn't do that, but he just replied, "Okay, Mom," clearly unhappy. He slept on the couch for the next 3 days. I missed having him in bed with me, so I asked him to come back to the bedroom, reassuring him I wasn't angry about what had happened. He returned, and once again, I woke up with the bed covered in a white mess. This time, I didn't say anything and decided to handle it differently. The next night, I slept in jeans to see if he would give up, but he became even bolder. It was pitch dark in the room when I woke up with him trying to touch me under my shirt. At first, I was startled, but I stayed quiet and let him continue, as if he was just sipping water from a bottle. Thoughts I shouldn't have had began to surface in my mind, but the excitement, only did he do the same thing. But I also felt him releasing himself again. The following day, he acted as if nothing had happened. At one point, he asked me to go back to wearing the same type of clothing as before, but I refused. After that, he started saying he wanted to leave and go live with his father, and that as soon as Cornelius called, he would ask him to take him away. I was terrified by the thought of being separated from John again, and I didn't want to lose the money Cornelius was paying me. So I gave in and went back to wearing the clothes he liked. That very night, instead of just relieving himself, he pulled out his tool, rubbing it against me. That's when I realized how large it really was. The next morning, without any shame, he showed me his tool, covered in scratches from rubbing it against me all night. Worse yet, he took photos of it and sent them to his father, who called immediately, asking what had happened. I pretended not to know, saying that maybe while he was at the beach, some sand got into his shorts and irritated him. Asked John what had happened. Thankfully, John repeated the same story I had made up. His father then told me to buy some ointment for the irritation and apply it, warning me to be more careful in the future. I went to the pharmacy, told them I needed ointment for a rash and bought it. When I gave it to John, I told him to apply it himself, but with his innocent face, he asked, "Mum, please, can you do it? Your hands are much softer." "All right," I said. "Show me and I'll put it on." That was the moment I realized just how privileged he was in terms of size. As I began applying the ointment, his tool grew so much and so quickly that my hand couldn't wrap around it. I had never seen anything that thick in my life. As I was about to stop, he asked me to rub it a little longer. And I did, smoothing it out more than I needed to. Eventually, I told him that was enough, and I stopped. I knew where this was heading, and although I felt guilty, I was terrified of losing John again. That night, in total darkness, he pulled out his tool once more, and I felt him rubbing against time, and before I knew it, I found myself quietly releasing my own tension. A minute later, John did the same, and immediately rolled over and fell asleep. I took the chance to get up, shower, and reflect on what I had done. I felt ashamed afterward. But the next night, I was already eagerly waiting for him again. During the day, he forgot to apply the ointment, and as the attentive mother I am, I reminded him, "Son, come here so Mum can put the ointment on." He came running over, excited, and once again it grew in my hand. That night, things escalated. He positioned himself differently, without saying a word, and rubbed against me even more. I couldn't hold back anymore. I looked him in the eyes and whispered, "I want it all tonight, John." I now despised Cornelius for forbidding us from experiencing this happiness all these years. "Your father is just a jealous fool," I told him. Stay tuned until the end of this story to find out what happened next. John gradually started kissing me, and, when we finished, he rolled off and fell into a deep sleep, while I once again took a shower. From that day on, he seemed to lose all hesitation and shame around me. 2 days later, when I was about to apply the ointment again, he told me he no longer needed it because he was fully healed. But then he made an unexpected request. "Mum, let me do with you what I do to my ice cream, down there." Surprised and a little confused, I asked, "John, what do you mean?" He answered playfully, "Let me do what Dad never had the courage to do." We laughed together, and I, still trying to understand what he truly wanted, replied, "All right, I'll take a shower and come back." When I returned, he had me lie down on the bed. I felt a bit embarrassed, as I had never been in such a situation during the day. Usually, things happened at night, in the privacy of darkness. This was new and different for me. I didn't know where John had learned such things, but he was doing very well. I surrendered to the moment, feeling both excitement and embarrassment. It was completely new. We took a shower together afterward, and while the water was falling on us, we kissed intensely. When we finished and I began to get dressed, he interrupted me, saying firmly, "From now on, you're not allowed to wear anything underneath." I didn't question him, I just replied, "Okay," not really knowing where this was all going. As time passed, I noticed he was becoming more assertive and dominant. There was a slight edge to his tone, almost like a threat, but despite feeling a bit uneasy, I was still drawn to the way he took control. One day, without telling me, he ordered several things online, and I only found out when the packages arrived. When I opened the box, I was shocked to see various items I wasn't expecting. A maid outfit, 4 pairs of handcuffs, a gag with a large ball at the end, and several other accessories. It was a surprise to realize how much control he had taken, but at the same time, there was a mix of curiosity and excitement. John seemed fearless now. Sometimes, while I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, he would sneak up, warning, start teasing me with his tool. There was something about his boldness that set me on fire. Even when I tried to stay focused on what I was doing, I couldn't understand why his actions provoked such a reaction in me. But he knew exactly what he was doing, and I always gave in to his game. In public, things started to change too. When we went to restaurants or even just the supermarket, he made me wear a toy inside me while he controlled it remotely. He would activate it suddenly while I was sitting, trying to eat or drink, and I struggled to hide any reaction. It was almost impossible not to show something, and the sensation was intense. John would smile, clearly enjoying the moment, taking pictures of me as I tried to act normal. I was completely under his control, and that strange combination of discomfort and adrenaline kept me coming back for more. One day, John decided to spend the whole day at the beach. He left early in the morning and didn't return until evening, enjoying the sun and the ocean, from him with instructions. He wanted me to prepare some coffee, take a bath, and put on the maid outfit he had ordered. He also wanted me to greet him by calling him Sir when he returned, as if I were his servant. Naturally, I did exactly what he asked, feeling a strange anticipation about what he had planned for the night. About an hour later, John came home, but he wasn't alone. He had brought 2 friends he'd met at the beach. They were both from Porto Alegre. I wasn't expecting company, but John set the tone for the evening. The 3 of them sat down to enjoy the coffee I had made, while I stood by their side, waiting for further instructions, as he had directed. I didn't know what to expect, but the atmosphere was charged with tension, and at the same time, it excited me. If you're enjoying this story of infidelity, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. After they finished their coffee, John surprised me again. Without saying a word, he pulled me close to him, lifted the maid's outfit, and exposed everything. The moment was intense, and while it should have been embarrassing, I found it strangely thrilling. The attention was on me, and although I was the object of their gaze, I felt a rush of excitement as John remained in control of the situation. However, the situation didn't escalate further that evening. After this brief moment of tension and exhibition, John's friends said their goodbyes and left, leaving just the 2 of us in the house. I thought the night would end there, but John had more plans. He instructed me to follow him to the bathroom where he began to shower. As the water poured over him, he asked me to stay and watch. I knew this wasn't an innocent request. There was a feeling of expectation hanging in the air. Midway through the shower, he looked at me with that familiar, commanding gaze and told me to kneel down in the shower and help him relieve himself. This wasn't something new for us, but the atmosphere that night was different. There was a mix of tension, excitement, and submission. I knew exactly what he wanted, and without hesitation, I did as moment. I know this might seem strange to some of you, but it's my truth. I'm someone who doesn't have shame in these situations, and I accept that about myself. I believe I deserve to go through these experiences, and in a way, they give me stories to share with all of you. Without these moments, I wouldn't have anything to tell, and deep down, I like having these stories to share. even if some people judge me for them. Whenever John wanted to relieve himself, I would help him. Whether it was on the couch, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, on the floor, in the kitchen, or even outside in the yard. He never seemed to tire of it. He also began using larger and larger toys on me, pushing my limits until I could take it all. One day I asked him why he had bought the handcuffs, as we hadn't used them yet. He replied that they were for the day I was ready for the next step. When I told him I thought I was ready, he wasted no time. He took the kitchen table, which was small, just for two. I cuffed my feet to each leg of the table, then my hands to the other legs, leaving me spread out, belly down. Then, he put the large gag with the ball in my mouth, silencing me completely. I was feeling excited, thinking it would be an easy experience, so I asked him to make sure to use plenty of gel. He set up a phone on one of the chairs to record the scene, and the footage was displayed on the living room TV, so I could see myself while it was happening. John started slowly, inserting the large toy into me from behind. Immediately, I felt an intense pain, as if my body was being pushed beyond its limits. It felt like I was being torn apart, and yet, he hadn't even gotten to the worst part, the middle of the toy, which was the thickest. As he pushed further, it felt like my body was on the verge of giving up. I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could endure. When he began thrusting with more force, I tried to squirm away, but I was trapped by the handcuffs. The pain was... Gag muffled my cries. It was clear that John was taking pleasure in my suffering. He said, "Oh, you'll manage just fine. I've been dying to try this out, and now you're going to take it." His voice had no sympathy, no concern for what I was feeling. Every push sent waves of agony through my body, but he wasn't in a rush. He wanted me to suffer, to endure the maximum amount of pain. He pushed in a little, then pulled out, taking his time to prolong the experience. I could see on his face that he was enjoying every second of it. My body was shaking from the pain, and tears streamed down my face, but it didn't matter to him. The more I struggled, the more he seemed to enjoy it. The experience was something I never thought I would endure. I cried, I screamed, and I begged silently for it to end, but nothing could stop him. Those who have never been in a situation like this can't understand the intense mixture of pain and desperation, but those who have been through it know exactly what I mean. To my relief, John didn't last long, climaxing within minutes. But for me, it felt like an eternity. The pain subsided and I was left exhausted. Despite everything, John wasn't bothered. He found it amusing. For days, he would watch the video of that moment, laughing and reliving it, while for me it had been one of the most painful experiences of my life. At first I was filled with anger and frustration, but as time passed, something changed. I started to find myself doing the same thing, watching the video and experiencing a strange sense of excitement. What had once been pure torture had now become part of our routine. Each day, we repeated the same actions, and what once was pain for me had turned into a kind of twisted pleasure. Somehow, I felt that the roles had reversed. As time passed, it felt like we had become more like husband and wife than mother and son. But for now, I'll pause the story here. It's late, and I need to rest. But before I go, I want to say that this is just a small part of everything that different and intense situations occurred that I can't possibly recount it all in one video. There were darker moments, moments that are difficult to share, and I know many of you are curious for more details, but I'll save those for another time. If you've enjoyed this story of infidelity, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's your support that keeps me sharing these stories with you, and believe me, there's so much more to tell. As time went by, John became more confident in our dynamic. There was no hesitation in his actions anymore, no second thoughts or doubts. It was as though we had crossed a line from which there was no return. Every night, I would wait for him with a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement, wondering what he would ask of me next. Despite the growing intensity of our interactions, there was a strange feeling of normalcy creeping into our daily lives. It was like we had settled into a routine, one that both thrilled and terrified me. Moment between us, John looked at me with an unfamiliar seriousness in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me carefully, as if trying to gauge what was going on inside my mind. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, I felt vulnerable, like I was no longer in control of myself. "Are you happy with this?" he asked, his voice low and calm. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, searching for the right words. Was I happy? I didn't know how to answer that. What we were doing was far beyond what I had ever imagined, and yet, there was something undeniably intoxicating about it. I had never felt such a powerful connection to anyone, not even to Cornelius. But was it happiness or something else entirely? I wasn't sure. "I don't know," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I think about what we're doing, and I wonder if it's right. But at the same time, I can't stop myself from wanting more." John's expression didn't change, but carefully. He stepped closer to me, his presence overwhelming as he stood just inches away. "We're beyond right and wrong now," he said softly, his eyes locked onto mine. "This is our life. No one else has to understand it. It's just you and me." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and in that moment, I knew he was right. No one else could ever understand what we had, or what had brought us to this point. It was a reality we had created together, and despite the moral boundaries we had crossed, it felt strangely complete. From that night onward, our relationship deepened even further. John became more possessive, more demanding, and yet I found myself surrendering to him more willingly with each passing day. He didn't just want me physically anymore, he wanted control over every part of my life. He would dictate what I wore, how I acted, and even what I ate. And I complied, not out of fear, but out of a desire to maintain this strange connection between us. Bold request. "I want us to go out together," he said, his tone commanding but with an underlying excitement. "Somewhere public. I want people to see us." I blinked in surprise. "You mean, like a date?" He nodded, a mischievous smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Exactly. Let's go somewhere nice. I want everyone to see how beautiful you are, and I want them to know that you're mine." The idea filled me with both excitement and dread. Going out in public, acting like a couple. It was something we hadn't done before. What if someone recognized us? What if people noticed the unusual dynamic between us? But despite my reservations, I agreed. That evening, we went out to a restaurant, a small, dimly lit place by the beach. I wore a dress that John had picked out for me, tight and revealing, just the way he liked it. As we walked into the restaurant, I felt the eyes of strangers on us, watching as John pulled out my... There was a strange thrill in the air, knowing that no one had any idea who we really were to each other. To them, we were just another couple, out for dinner. Throughout the meal, John kept the remote to my hidden toy in his pocket, occasionally turning it on and watching as I struggled to maintain my composure. Every time the sensation hit, I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping, and John would just smile, clearly enjoying the power he held over me. At one point, a waiter came over to check on us, asking if everything was all right. I nodded quickly, trying to hide the flush on my cheeks, but John didn't miss a beat. He leaned in, his voice low and possessive as he whispered, "Tell him how good you're feeling right now." I glanced at the waiter, my heart pounding in my chest. "Everything's perfect," I managed to say, forcing a smile. The waiter, none the wiser, smiled back and left us alone, but John's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. If we had broken through another layer of boundaries and there was no turning back. From that moment on, John's dominance over me became absolute. He pushed me to my limits, both physically and emotionally, and while part of me wanted to resist, another part of me craved the intensity of it all. Yet, as time went on, I began to wonder where this would all lead. Could we really keep living this way, in our own little world, isolated from everything and everyone else? Or was it only a matter of time before everything came crashing down? I still don't have all the answers, but I know one thing for sure. Our story isn't over yet. There's more to come, and as long as John is by my side, I'll follow him wherever this path leads us. End of the story. Before you leave, remember to subscribe to the channel by activating the Tinkerbell to receive notification every time.